Bobcat. I've got a special treat for you today. We're going to do the Northport High School chocolate chip cookies. I have had already a few of you asking for this. Now it's a little bit different than when we do it at school. When we do it at school, we do a larger batch. I've cut this batch down to 1/4 of the size. So we usually use 1 pound of butter at school. We're using 1/4 pound or 1 stick of butter for this recipe. Also, you notice there's something missing here. Piece of equipment that we would always use for this at school. And that's our commercial mixer. I'm under the assumption that most of you do not have a mixer at home, and that's fine. I don't have one here either. So we're going to go ahead and do this by hand. In order to do it by hand, there's one thing that really is essential that's different than what we do at school. When we make these at school, we pull that pound of butter right out of the refrigerator and we let the mixer whip it up and cream it essentially. Well, without a mixer, we can't use cold butter. It absolutely is essential that we're using room temperature butter that's nice and soft, like you can see there, or we won't be able to make these cookies. So that's where I'm going to start. I'm going to add my butter and my other wet ingredients, my butter, my eggs, my sugar, into the big bowl, because eventually that's where everything is going to be going, into the big bowl. So I'm going to add that to the big bowl first. Take that paper off the butter there. You want to make sure you get all the butter off the paper. You can fold it in and just sort of squeeze it out. It's not going to come out clean because it's not cold. Butter right in there. Towel, keep my hands clean. I've got 1/2 cup of white sugar I'm going to add. And I've got 1/2 cup of brown sugar I'm going to add also. We want to make sure you're not packing this too tight. It should just be lightly packed 1/2 cup of sugar, brown sugar. Now, the recipe I'm going to give you is going to call for unsalted butter and then 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I am not putting that 1/4 teaspoon of salt in because I had to use salted butter. That's the butter I had. A lot of you are not going to have unsalted butter. You're going to have salted butter, in which case you leave the salt out altogether, and I will note that on the recipe. So I've got my butter, my brown sugar, and my white sugar in the bowl, and what I'm going to do now is cream those together, and I'm just going to use a rubber spatula for that. You can use a wooden spoon, is probably ideal. We're just going to start by mashing that butter into the sugar. And just keep mixing it together until it starts to really bind together and get soft. There's a lot of moisture in the sugar actually, and once that butter hits it, it should start to loosen up. It's going to be crumbly at first, but it should start to cream up nice. And this is why it's essential that the butter is warm. Because if the butter is cold, it's not going to mix together. There's just no way. Alright. See, now we're really going. It's loosened up nice. And we just want to work it for a minute or so until we kind of have a paste that's formed. There we go. It's kind of like that. Once we have this paste, now we can add our egg and our vanilla to the mixture. So I'm going to add my egg first. I'm going to crack it into a separate little dish. Make sure I'm not putting any shell into the dough. Open our egg up. And we can actually take our teaspoon of vanilla and just add it right to the egg right there. So do that. I've got all natural vanilla here. I'm going to take a teaspoon of that, put it right in there with my egg, is fine. I'm going to add that to my creamed butter and sugar. Now we got to work that egg into the butter and sugar before we can add any of our dry ingredients to this. That's going to come together pretty quick. Just make sure you don't see any yellow streaks in there and all the white is good and mixed in. You'll see it's nice and loose now. You can scrape the sides. That's why it's nice to use a rubber spatula, and a wooden spoon works good for scraping the sides of the bowl also. All right, now I'm ready to mix my dry ingredients together. I'm going to do that in a separate bowl to start. I'm starting with 1 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. Please make sure you're using all-purpose flour. Bread flour is going to have too much gluten in it, and you're going to end up with hard cookies. And cake flour doesn't have enough gluten, so the cookies won't stand up nicely. Just use all-purpose flour. So we've got our flour in there, 1 1/4 cups. We need to add just a ½ teaspoon of baking powder. ½ teaspoon baking powder. That right in there. And then right to our dry ingredients, we want to add our chocolate chips. I like to put the chocolate chips in with the flour because then when we mix it into the wet ingredients, the chocolate chips help mix the cookie dough together quicker. We don't want to overwork the dough. Remember, if we work it too long, mixing it up, then the glutens are going to develop, and we're going to end up with very hard cookies, and we don't want that. So we're just going to give this a mix. Those chocolate chips kind of help it mix together. And then we're going to take all of this and pour it in with our wet ingredients all at once. And I'm going to get all this stuff out of my way real quick here. Bring our baking pan over. Good. All right, now I can incorporate my wet and dry ingredients. And those chocolate chips really do help it come together. And just keep scraping the sides, getting all that loose, dry flour into the mix. A little mess on the counter, no problem. You'll clean it up. Nothing to worry about. Just make sure we're always cleaning up after we cook. Clean up while you're cooking. Don't mess up the kitchen. You won't be allowed to use it. All right, that's basically it. My dough is formed here. So that's our cookie dough. And we're ready to start scooping it out onto the pan. I'll show you how to do that. Now, I usually use 2 spoons at home. Just like this, where you scoop with 1 spoon and then you can push it off with the other spoon. You just want, this is probably going to make between a dozen and 18 cookies, depending on how big you make the scoops. And just start lining them out on the pan. Make sure you're giving them enough space to spread. These are not going to all be perfectly the same size, and that's fine. And I usually do about 3 across on a pan and 4 down, so we have a dozen cookies on 1 half pan or half sheet tray. I do have parchment paper on here. I try to use it whenever I can. If you don't have parchment paper at home, that's fine. Try to use a non-stick cookie sheet. If you have parchment paper, by all means use it. It really does keep things cleaner. We're just going to finish up, scooping out our dozen cookies. The spoons really do. Using the second spoon really helps you keep your hands clean and helps you keep everything nice and organized. Now I've got the oven already heated up to 375 degrees because that's what I found works with my oven. All ovens are going to be a little bit different. You're going to want to have the oven on at least at 350 degrees and probably no more than 400 degrees. 400 is probably going to be a little hot. I've got mine at 375, and at 375 these cookies are probably going to take about 15 minutes. Remember, our ovens at school, they cook a little bit faster because they are commercial convection ovens. So this is going to take a little bit more time at home than it would if you were doing it at school. I got my last cookie on there. All right, now hopefully I got these spaced apart enough that they're not all going to cook right into each other. Hopefully we'll get lucky there. I'm going to put them into the oven. I'm going to set a timer for 8 minutes, then I'll check them and I'll probably give them a spin, and I'll get back with you when the cookies are ready. Okay, so I did spin the cookies at 8 minutes. and then I finished them off to about 14-15 minutes. It took about a full 15 minutes to get these cookies all the way done. And we know they're done when they're browned up around the edge and they're just starting to brown on top. We do not want them to fully brown. We want them to be kind of soft on the inside and just crispy around the outside. And these look really gorgeous. Now, you probably want to do, especially if you have more cookies to bake, is transfer these to a plate or a cooling rack to let them cool down so you can reuse this pan and make more cookies, which is what I'm going to do now. But these look delicious. I'll break one open for you, and they are blazing hot, and you can see they're probably real steamy, and the chocolate chips are nice and melty inside, and these are the cookies we're famous for. See you guys next time.